Howdy, y'alls. Welcome back to Anthropology 111, Introduction to Cultural Anthropology. It's me, Dr. Edwards, your instructor extraordinaire, here to help you out. And I thought I would put together a little video to go over some of our key concepts for our first week's worth of reading and material. So make sure to read the announcement that's going to be below this video and read through all of that, but I got some extra stuff that I want to include here. This week, we dive in head first. We start exploring what culture is, why it's important, how it influences our perspective, how it influences our decisions and the choices and actions that we have. Culture, I can't stress enough, surrounds everything in our lives. Everything is touched by culture. It is literally the means by which we understand and interpret our world. And there's three key concepts that I want to make sure that you guys have a good grasp of. The first is enculturation. Enculturation is the process through which you acquire culture, your birth culture, if you would, or the culture that you were raised within. It highlights that culture is learned. It's not innate. It's not in you. All right, you acquire it from an outside source. Extrasomatic would be a technical term for that. We all have, family that raised us, and that family, even if you're adopted, doesn't matter, you still had family that raised you. They start teaching you at a very young age what is right and what is wrong, what's considered acceptable, what's not considered acceptable, what's ethical, what's unethical. All of these things are part of your enculturation process, even the language that you speak, all right? A key thing with enculturation is it also teaches us that our culture is normal, that our culture is good, is correct. Now, a funny thing happens with that. Because it teaches us our culture is the right culture, it tends to imply that other cultures are not right. Now, this is our second concept here. This is called ethnocentrism. And ethnocentrism is using your own cultural standards that you're born and raised with to judge another culture's standards and practices, their values. And that's a big no-no. We don't want to do that as anthropologists. We try to avoid that at all costs. Because then we're imposing our views upon that. Now, you can use that culture's standards to, say what's right and wrong for them, but not your own. All right? Now, I've lived in a lot of different cultures all over the world. Very different cultures than my birth culture, where I grew up. I was born in Kansas, of all places. But I lived in Switzerland, northern Pakistan. I spent a lot of time in West Africa. I've lived all over Europe. Now, ethnocentrism is a very natural thing because you're taught that your culture is good when you're a kid. And that tends to get us to looking at others and judging them. Now, it's okay to have feelings about other groups, but we don't want to just have a knee-jerk reaction, if you would. And to avoid that, all right, to have a more critical perspective, a more understanding perspective, we employ a special tool called cultural relativism. And we get to thank the father of American anthropology for this, a guy named Franz Boas. Back in the day, the differences between cultural groups, or different groups, they didn't call them cultural groups back then, they were just called different groups. Race was the key concept used, that this group does it that way because they're this particular race, and that group does it that way because they're another race. Well, the concept of race is really flawed. We'll get into that later in this course, but for right now, it's key to understand that Boas, the father of American anthropology, was the guy who said culture explains those differences, not race. All right, race is a social construct. Culture is a real thing, right? You can't get around it. Now, this Boas's concept, he had a special name for it. It was called historical particular. It's hard for me to say. Historical particularism. And what it meant was that every culture has its own particular history, and to understand why a group does what it does, you have to understand their history, that their history explains that. Today, we call this whole concept cultural relativism. And it means that we need to look within the group that we're studying or trying to understand it. We can't take our outside values and use that to judge their practices or thoughts or feelings. That would be unethical. So yeah, these three concepts of enculturation, cultural relativism, and ethnocentrism are key for us.